Okay. Good morning. Again, my name is Lance Beck. I'm President CEO of the Greater Spokane Valley Chamber of Commerce. We are pleased to welcome you to this morning's Let's Talk Shop program featuring our team from AIM Build and Consulting and Development. Joining us today, we have Alex and Carrie from the ABCD team. We are going to jump right into the presentation here to allow plenty of time for questions at the end. As a matter of procedure that we'd like to ask everybody to follow along with us, please, for your questions as the meeting's going on, you're able to post your questions in the chat box. If you're joining us on the phone, there is a easy toggle for you to do, and that's *9. That raises your hand. We understand you don't have access to a chat box, so if you are on the phone and joining us, please just toggle the raise hand function there. We'll be able to call on you and let you ask your question at the end there. Otherwise, as we go through, if you're entering a question in the chat box, we ask that you enter your first name, last name, and business name prior to your question, so that in the event that we can't get through all questions due to time here, we will follow up with you directly with the team from ABCD as well as the Valley Chamber to make sure we get you answers today for your question. So again, please, in the chat box, first name, last name, company name. That'll help us follow up with you after the event. This webinar is being recorded. We will have the link for you to be able to access this recording up by the end of the day. It'll be posted to YouTube here so that you'll have access to that. So don't feel frantic if you missed something or if you didn't get a chance to write it all down in that moment. You'll be able to go back to it. We will have it posted. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Alex and Carrie for a brief introduction of them and then let them get into their presentation. So at this time, Carrie and Alex, if you would unmute yourself, and then we'll let you take it from there.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Alex Barrouk. Thanks for having us facilitate this conference, Lance. So I'm going to be very brief because we really want to dive into the subject today. AIM Build Consulting and Development, ABCD, is a business consulting firm. We help businesses identify what's holding them back, define strategies, then turn these strategies into reality so businesses can grow. In the current context, of course, like everybody else, we had to adapt our approach, and we've been helping businesses with game plans to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. A critical part of this process is HR. And in terms of HR, we do three things. We audit, we consult and offer strategies, and we also have the capability to outsource HR. Carrie is our in-house HR expert. Among other things, she's an expert in a bunch of subjects, but HR is the most important today. And I'm the founder of ABCD, and as a consultant, my focus is on business growth, strategy, and execution. So the goal today will be to give you very practical info on how you can navigate the current crisis and I insist on that, and stay compliant. So we're going to leave as much time as possible for Q&As and answer to the best of our abilities in a context that's changing daily, as you all know. We also sent a few forms to Lance that I think he will make available to you guys to apply some of the points that we discussed today. And with that, I think we just going to jump in, and I'm going to let the mic to Carrie, and I will just jump in when it comes to business strategy related points.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Lance. Can everybody hear me? I guess you're all muted. So I really appreciate being here. I know that there has been an abundance of information. I was going to name this presentation yet one more presentation on COVID-19, right? But what I have found from practicing HR is what there's not a lot out there is good practical advice from businesses 50 employees or under on how to survive this quarantine, and to some extent, how to survive the relief measures that are being brought about by the quarantine. I know a lot of people probably have questions on the paid sick time, the FMLA, and yesterday Lance and the Chamber had the GSI group had an amazing presentation by some employment attorneys getting really into the nitty gritty of all the FMLA, the sick time, things like that. So I would encourage everybody who has detailed questions about that. I believe there's going to be an email sent with the link to that presentation. Great info in there. And today I'm going to be talking about more of how to deal with some of your people problems, people issues and concerns that come about as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And again, as always, these are general HR best practices. A lot of the HR best practices I'll be bringing up, some of them will open up cans of worms. So don't feel too much pressure when we talk about things that maybe should be in place that aren't. I work almost exclusively with small and mid-sized businesses, and I know that the demands of the business often means we're a bit behind in some of the structures and processes, and that's okay. We're going to talk about best practices, and then if there's really specific questions, we'll try and get to that. As Lance mentioned, we're going to leave as much time as possible for questions. Just use the chat box, first name, last name, business. And now let's get into HR answers to tough questions. What I'm hoping to talk about today is what your business is going to be like in lockdown mode, navigating the wage and hour laws, never easy to understand at the best of times, navigating those through a slowdown. What happens if you need to change an employee's job description, duties, things like that as a result of the slowdown. Talk about layoff policies for private sector employers. And unfortunately, layoffs, furloughs, standby, wage and hour laws, specifically how to apply and communicate those to your employees. So I think the big question that we've had for the last several weeks is what's going to happen? Now, as a business owner, now more than ever, I'm going to jump on systems and processes a little bit, because what you're going to do next is going to be determined a lot by how good your systems are for predicting future revenue. A lot of times we manage by the rearview mirror with our P&Ls, but if you have lead indicator metrics, if you have metrics that give you a good sense of, wow, we're not going to hit our revenue by this much. The better your systems are now, the better decisions you'll be able to make. And this is one thing that is not often in place. But the more information you have privy to, the best educated guess you can get right now, the better your decisions will be. Your AR cycles. If you've already got people, pushing 90 days, this is a huge pain point right now. So, and not only that, but your customer's AR cycle and your understanding of your customer situation. So, always know that information is critical. Well, now more than ever. So, metrics, systems, processes for gauging the health of your company are super important now more than ever. And on that, if you feel confused, overwhelmed, disoriented, or bewildered, I think that's kind of the global feeling right now. This is the world of COVID-19, where all of a sudden everything's uncertain, and that's just what we're dealing with. So just want to acknowledge that. So the one thing that hasn't changed as of yet, as you're going through all these changes you need to make in your business regarding your employees, is that general HR practices still apply. From what I've been able to see in research, most HR wage and hour laws, everything that the Department of Labor has set in place, they're not changing, they're not easing up. Those are almost all still in effect. The other thing that, and you're going to hear this from me throughout, because this is a general HR best practice, is we have to look at disparate treatment. So obviously, I think we all know as business owners, we wouldn't make a law that says, all the women get one thing, all the men get another, or all the over 40s get one thing. We would never do that intentionally. We're all well-versed enough in employment law not to do that. But disparate impact is something that comes up a lot, especially when we're making termination decisions or layoff decisions. And it basically, the sum of it says, even if you don't mean to single out a certain group, if your policies result in a group being singled out or treated differently than other people because of your policies, that's a problem. So we have to look at that without, look at the impact, not just the treatment. This might go without saying, but maybe not. I mean, as business owners, we're just as stressed out as everybody else. We are looking at maybe mass employee changes. Your senior leaders need now more than ever not to tell anyone anything off the record, in quotes, under the cone of silence. Because again, information is currency. People are trying to figure out what's going to happen. So as a leader, you need to share this with your leader peers, chamber peers maybe, but be wary of sharing things with your employees that you're not ready for everybody to know. And don't make promises you can't keep. We all want our employees to be safe. We all want people to think that everything's going to be okay. We don't know that it's going to be okay. So balancing optimism with authenticity is really important during this time. And remember, of course, when people don't know stuff, they fill in the blanks, and they don't fill it in with positive, happy thoughts. People fill in the blanks with worst case scenario. So that's really the general HR things. So let's talk about likely scenarios that are going to happen as a result of, the whole world being in lockdown for the next 2 to ? Weeks. How is that going to affect your business? Well, first is, a best case scenario. Maybe your business can pivot. Maybe you can keep the same employees, just have them doing different tasks. Maybe you're a restaurant who can keep everybody because you can transition to curbside and delivery. Maybe you're in manufacturing and you can manufacture different things. So if that's the case, and the other way people are pivoting obviously is working remotely, working from home, which we'll be talking about. So if you can pivot, you will keep your employees and they'll be doing different things differently. That is one scenario. Second scenario is you'll experience possibly significant but temporary drop in revenue. Third is you'll experience a significant but longer than temporary, more than a few months, more than maybe business can sustain with your full employee base. So those are the likely scenarios. I'd love to say everything will be fine by Monday. Everything will be different on Monday. I can pretty much say that with confidence. We will have new things to be contending with. I'm not sure it's all going to be fine. So given that, and I do see a question about unemployment. Well, I guess I'll just jump to that real quick. Will our unemployment ratings suffer from this crisis? Maybe, but I don't think that will be, I don't know. It looks like the unemployment, they're taking into account things that we're facing right now in all different scenarios across the board. So I would hope there would be a way to mitigate what's happening. And again, we might find more about that as we see all these interventions getting applied. Okay, so let's take the maybe best case scenario, different work conditions. So your manufacturer, your retailer, you are not able to continue business as usual, but you are able to secure a contract or change the way you're doing things. You can still employ everyone, but several people's jobs will change substantially. Is it okay to tell them they will have different jobs now? Okay, so here's the deal with changing people's jobs. Now, I'm assuming that everybody already has complete job descriptions with ADA requirements built in. Now that I'm actually not assuming that. That's one of those things, those can of worms, that if you don't have written job descriptions with the ADA requirements, it's a good time to think about it, because as you change people's jobs, the first thing you're going to need to do is have a job description. And when I say ADA, I mean the Americans with Disabilities Act. What I mean by this is you have a job description with the physical requirements of the job written on it. So if someone needs to stand for hours at a time, if they need to lift things, if they need to pull, carry, see well, work in loud conditions, it's important, especially now, that those requirements are on your job description. Because you can't just say, I don't think they can do it. They have to see the job and the requirements and decide if they can do it or not. So you make sure, in addition, that even if you're staying open, you need to make the accommodation that people can do their work while maintaining that 6-foot distance. Review the new job requirements and the pay, what the pay is for the job with the employees. And they can then, you can offer them the job if they can do the job with or without accommodation. And So basically, you're going to say, hey, instead of waiting tables, you are now going to work curbside. This requires you walking in and out, standing at the curb, standing outside and outside weather, whatever it is, you're going to make clear really clearly the specifics of the job, and they can sign off that, yes, I can do that, no problem. Another thing is telecommuting. People are going to be changing their job function from regular on-site to telecommuting. Same thing. If you can maintain operations, that's amazing. Have them work from home. Ensure they have the needed equipment. Most people have a computer and a phone. If they're going to be needing to print things, probably good practice just to make sure they have that. Or, we went into that more in detail on the call yesterday, so I'm not going to get a lot into that, but make sure they can do the job. I would suggest at this point you have an internet social media policy, because if people are up to bad things on your time on the internet, if you have an internet policy and a social media policy, it's protection for you. And I would also suggest a telecommuting policy. Not so much that we're concerned that people aren't going to work their full 8 hours and you're not going to get as much out of them. I'm more concerned with people saying, well, obviously I can do my job from home, so I'm never going to come back to the office again. A good policy saying, hey, this is a temporary basis, you're coming back when we can, will help avoid problems down the road. And that's a lot of what we want to do in HR, is you want to avoid unnecessary problems and complaints. So there are some pitfalls. Be on the lookout for certain things that are going to happen when you're changing people's jobs or you're asking them to do different things. The main one is don't make assumptions about their ability to do the job. And again, this usually isn't a malicious thing. This is usually you've heard somebody saying, or it's common knowledge, that a person doesn't want to be standing all day. Or because you've known them for 20 years that they have a bad knee. Or that they really just want to be laid off because they're scared of getting coronavirus. All these things come up. And even if you do know it, don't make assumptions. Do everything by the book, because the best of people can behave badly when they're fearful or they're concerned for their financial future. So an innocent comment that you make, like, oh, I know you have a bad knee, so I know you don't want to be doing this job, so I'm just going to lay you off. Perfectly innocent, maybe that would be fine, but say the unemployment doesn't work out the way the government says it is, their future is in danger, and all of a sudden they're accusing you of firing them because they had a bad knee. So you just want to make sure you do everything on the up and up, everything by the book. Reasonable accommodations. So the reasonable accommodations you need to provide for people to do their new jobs can't disrupt your business to the point of crippling you. So if somebody needs, drastic accommodations that would disrupt business or, bankrupt you, those are not reasonable. Unfortunately, I can't give you a much better definition of reasonable because they've kept it purposely vague. But basically, you need to ask if people can do the job or if they need accommodations, and if they do need accommodations, what they are. That's your part. That you have done the right thing if you've done that. Again, I said I'd be mentioning this quite a bit. Changes can't have disparate impact. So if you said, I'm going to let all my receptionists go because, there's nobody in the front office, so there's nobody here anyway, so I don't need front office graders. And all your front office people were all one particular, a different race, or they were all, a protected class of some kind. They were all your over 40s. And those were the only people you let go. Even though, and this is where HR is so frustrating sometimes for business people, even though they all had the same job class, you just need to be extra diligent that if you are noticing you're having disparate impact, do everything you can to mitigate it. If you can't mitigate it, because that's just how it was, just make sure you're documenting the reasons for making your decisions. And the fact that it had disparate impact had nothing to do with intent. It was just so happened that all three of your front office people were in that class. But when you're noticing things like that, it's good to make note of it just to protect yourself again. And finally, have an end date or an implied end date for changes you don't want to live with forever. So again, we're at will. We don't want to imply contract. We don't want to say you're going to have a job in 2 months because we don't know. But if you are still here and everything is still the same in 2 months, we are going to be, putting people back into the office, not on the telecommute. So you just don't want people to be thinking that, you know, whatever you're doing for an interim basis is something that's going to be permanent. There are a lot of laws in place that make it hard for employers to make changes. The predictable scheduling is one. That's a big one in the Western Washington. But a lot of these predictive scheduling, the WARN Act, things that say you need to give notice before you can change people's schedules. Check for the laws, but for the most part, I'm pretty confident that almost all of these laws that require advance warning have some sort of caveat saying if there's a, you know, massive global pandemic or emergency or disaster, you're not held to them as strictly as you would be otherwise. So I'm not super concerned about predictable scheduling. Just be aware that those laws can exist and you might want to check on it. I think the bigger thing that we're seeing, I'm certainly seeing this with some of my clients, is the employee says no. It's like, I don't want my job to be changed. You can't do that to me. So what do, right? That you say, okay, you have to go from being a cook to a dishwasher. And they say, no, I'm not gonna, you hired me to be a cook. That's what I'm gonna be. So what are your choices? This is a really nice, elegant coaching discussion that works in a variety of situations. So take this, adapt it, use it as you will. When this happens, I let the employee know, you know, you have three choices. And, you know, choice one is you can accept this new job and the new conditions, and you can do the best you can, and I'll do everything I can to support you. All the support I can offer you, you have. I know you're not going to be great at it at first, but that's okay. So that's choice one. Take the job, do your best. Choice two is, okay, well, that's the job that you have to choose from. If you don't want to take it, you can resign. That's your choice. Now there's a third choice, and this is the choice often we see employees make, which is, okay, they'll accept the new job and then they'll do horrible at it and complain and make everybody else miserable and get fired. And I point this out to employees. I go, that is a third option, but how about you don't choose that one? How about you choose one or two? Because if you do three, you're getting fired anyway. So if you're not going to do your best at this, why don't you just choose two? The point is that you as the employer can change their jobs. They don't have to do it, but they can't force you to let them keep their old job if their old job doesn't exist anymore. And that's just how it is. Okay. So the next is when we have short-term tough times. If you have good data to suggest that your revenues are going to drop, but you think things will come back on track, but you know you can't make payroll at the current staffing levels. Okay, that's when we get into the furlough and the standby, which is basically you reduce people's hours, maybe completely, like maybe it's like a temporary layoff, that's like standby, or you're reducing their hours significantly to the point where, you know, they're not, you know, the job's not paying their bills basically.
Carrie?
Yeah.
If you don't mind, can I jump in here for a second? I want to connect this to a point you made at the very beginning when you were talking about having metrics and understanding your HR and how it's critical right now. So what Carrie was talking about, for people who are not aware, I'm sure a lot of you are already aware of that, is understanding what are your trigger points. If you're going to have some people on standby, you just have to have a projection, a game plan in place before that. When I get to that level of revenue, I can only, obviously this is for people who are still in business, I can only pay that many people. So you already have a plan in place based on your metrics and trigger plans. And if you have more questions about that, we can answer later.
Thanks, Alex. So basically what happens if you're putting your employees on this, they are not required to look for work. That's the big difference. They'll still get paid for unemployment. Well, they'll probably get instantly rejected, but according to what I've seen, but then they will get replaced on unemployment. They don't have the mandate to look for work, and they've expanded this to be up for 12 weeks. So they'll basically be eligible for unemployment insurance. Really, if you're doing this, I mean, anytime you let someone go, I always recommend having a notice of change of relationship saying why. Basically saying you're laid off, you're fired for cause, you're laid off due to lack of work. It's always good to have that for your records anyway. But especially in this case, you're going to want a note saying they're on standby. So that's one of your options. Another option is Workshare. And that, of course, is an arrangement between the employer and employment, the ESD they'll supplement the worker's income. So they will supplement so the employee can keep working some of the time, not all of the time. That way they get to remain employed. They're not maintaining full unemployment benefits. They stay on your payroll essentially, just at a lesser capacity. And then, of course, if you just don't know, or maybe you've been overstaffed in anticipation of growth that didn't happen, you just know people aren't going to come back. So it's like a furlough, but there's no reconciliation at the end. So in that case, employees are no longer considered employees. They're expected to look for new work to maintain their unemployment. That is a long-term layoff. Now, I am going to open a can of worms, not because I am the best person to answer this, but because I think you need to talk to your benefits broker if you're considering a lot of layoffs. And that's the question of the health benefits. I have been asking all the brokers I know, if someone's on standby and you know you want to hire them back, can you keep them on your benefits plan? Because most health benefit plans, you have to say, person eligible for benefits is working X hours a week. They're full-time, usually it's, 30 to 40 hours a week. That's the requirement. And I've been trying to find out, are these health carriers going to be jerks about it? Can you keep people on your plan if you're reducing their hours to 10 to 15 hours a week because of COVID? And the answer I've got is, it depends. Talk to your carrier. So it's not helpful, but it's a question you're going to need to ask, because you don't want to lose your whole health plan because you're bending the rules to help people. So unfortunately, that's just one of those awful things to think about. So basically, talk to your broker or your health insurance carrier to find out if you're going to be in violation if you offer benefits to people who aren't working or aren't full-time. The other thing, if you have a 401k plan and you let a whole bunch of people go, talk to your third-party administrator to find out if it's going to make your discrimination testing out of whack, or if it's going to do anything to your plan, disrupt the numbers. And the last one, if you maintain your health benefits plan, so if you have at least one person still on plan, you can maintain your benefits plan. But typically when people are let go, they have an option to get COBRA, continuation of benefits. And that usually costs 102% of the premium. So if someone is completely terminated from the company and they want to get COBRA, then you need to look into whether or not that's still considered affordable under the Affordable Care Act and blah, 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 just things to be aware of. So as you're looking at your numbers and looking at, am I going to lay people off, put them on standby, put them on Workshare, talk to your broker, talk to your carrier to say, look, in these scenarios, what's going to happen to my plan? Is this okay? Get it in writing if you can. So a bigger thing that I think a lot of us are thinking about is, how do you choose who stays and who goes? So first is, if you have a collective bargaining agreement, that's like, you have to follow that. You don't want to run afoul of the unions. If you're a private employer, you don't have a collective bargaining agreement, you don't have unions. You're trying to decide, first you're going to look at essential jobs, of course. If you're an essential employer or somebody has a job that is required to make your company work, then they're going to stay. Other things you're going to look at though, and here's the real life scenario, is you have someone who's sort of been half in, half out anyway. You're not convinced this is the best employee and they've been here longer than your superstar. Can you keep the superstar and let the not so great person go, even though they've been there longer? That's honestly what this almost always comes down to. Now, if you have a layoff policy, that's easier because you can refer to it, but we often don't have those in place because we're not usually expecting a layoff. But you can look at performance. You can look at the person's ability to take on new tasks based on have they done other tasks or something similar in their past. And you can look at seniority. All these play a factor. So let's talk about kind of the pitfalls. Again, you got to review the affected employees. I'm going to go back because this isn't saying what I thought it would say. So basically, the biggest snafu I think you can run into is you're going to want to keep your people based on performance. And if you're like most organizations, you probably don't have great records and really defining why someone's a better performance than someone else. Because if you're telling, you know, person A, I'm letting you go, and they'll say, why? I've been here the longest. And you say, well, because you're not performing as well as person B. And then they say, well, let's look at my performance review. I bet it's the same as everybody else's. And it is, or there's no performance reviews, or there's nothing in their file that ever indicates they were a lackluster performer, which is, you know, more often the case than not. Then it's a bit shaky ground. And if you add to that, so you're telling this person it's for performance and they're a protected class and they have this feeling that you've been out to get them, it just can cause more problems than you need at this juncture. So, I mean, I've said, you know, I hope you've always been documenting performance. And yeah, in my ideal world, you have great metrics on performance. If you don't, and the files are bare and the reviews are unhelpful, then you probably are better off looking at the essentialness of the job, their previous record of taking on new tasks. And if all things are not equal, you know, and you're not basing it on seniority, try to have as best documentation as you can as to why you're making that choice. That's all. Because again, people make assumptions, especially when it's unwelcome news that you don't necessarily want them to make. So again, as you're letting people go, make sure that you're not having disparate impact or you're mitigating that. We talked about this a lot yesterday, but as people are staying and they're working less hours and you have someone who's a legitimate salaried worker, do not start paying them by the hour. You can't change their status to hourly just because they're working less hours. There's things you can do, but don't pay them by the hour. Consider creating a layoff policy if you don't have one. Provide the paperwork explaining what's happening. You're getting put on standby. If there's work in 12 weeks, we will call you. And do not get into discussions about the other employees. Like, well, how come she gets to stay and you're letting go of me? She doesn't work. I work better than her. Shut that down. It won't go anywhere. It's not a fruitful discussion, even though people have it. And again, do not get into assumptions about abilities. Well, I'm letting you go because I know you want to probably just be at home with your kids. So, you know, this is better. Okay. And okay, I see one question on the hourly. We'll address that at the end. Okay, so when you're laying off large scale layoffs, these are awful. Like when you're letting go of people who've been like your family or they've been around for a long time, it's horrible. People cry, people get mad. Just be prepared for that. I mean, usually by the end of the day, when you're the one having these discussions, you're wrung out. It's awful. But, you know, it's just going to happen, you know, so just be prepared and, you know, don't take it personally, I guess, if anything. Don't take on more than your share of the burden or less than your share of the burden. I mean, it's a significant life-altering decision to tell someone they're not going to be employed anymore, but it's also not something that you did. So help them, guide them to the resources, and then trust them to take advantage of the resources that are out there. This one, you know, I was managing HR in a construction company in 2004 to 2007 when we were laying off everybody because there was just no lack of work. And it's very tempting to say, well, I'm going to be telling everybody the same thing. So I'm just going to have a team meeting and tell everybody they're laid off. Just don't do it. It's really good, a better idea if you're laying off a group to still have it one-on-one, even though the last person knows exactly what you're going to say. It's better for them. It's better for you if you have this discussion one-on-one. And I guess to end with, before we get to the questions, is, you know, throughout this, you're the leader. So even though you may not feel calm, reassuring, hopeful, and encouraging, try to provide that as best you can. You know, I tend to function in the realm of optimism, and I believe, you know, everything, you know, good can come out of any bad. This will pass, and, you know, your employees you're letting go, even if you know you're not going to be hiring them back, at least let them leave with confidence that you believe in them, that you believe in their abilities, that they're good people, that they have other prospects. So I think that's something we can do for everyone in these times. So that is all the everything, all the information I wanted to share today. And I think we wanted to leave as much time for questions as possible. So Lance, how do you want to field these?
Just one last thing, Carrie, before we jump into the questions, and I think Lance will select the questions. Can you say really quick, what are the 4 forms that you shared?
Oh, yes, I shared a layoff policy. So just a sample policy you could consider for layoff recall, a telecommute policy, a sample policy for telecommuting, a change of relationship, and I don't know the 4th one, Alex. I'm sorry. I'll have to check my notes on that.
The 4th one was, so you have the notice of layoff, the notice of reduction in force.
Yes. Okay.
Is that the one?
Yeah. So those 2. Yeah.
There you go. Temporary telecommuting
Mm-hmm.
and sample of layoff policy. So all of those are with Lance. And that was it. That was so Lance, if you want to jump into the questions.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Alex. We will be sending out a follow-up with the 4 forms attached for everybody. So those forms will come. There's not a super easy way to direct send files through the app. So it's just easier to send them in an email to you. So you will have those in the next hour or so with the link to the video from today's call. Going back, Carrie, to questions. I think because of where we were at on the shared work program, and there have been quite a few changes to shared work from ESD over the last week, and so this is why there's a lot of confusion on that program. And it sounds like Gene from Clint Hosmer has actually utilized that program. So we do have an interesting, we may have you unmute, Gene, and just to share your experience through the application process there. There is the process where they do require you to convert your staff to hourly if you're going to utilize that program. So 2 questions that we had come in there. One was, do employers have to maintain benefits for their staff in the shared work program? And I believe that is yes. If you're utilizing shared work, you are maintaining your staff benefits to those employees. And then another follow-up to the shared work was, where do you find additional resources for shared work? The shared work page has been updated in the last couple days. We're going to put that link. I believe somebody actually already shared it up there above, but again, I just shared that. On there, the page that I would point everyone to, if possible, when you're looking on the shared work site, there's an FAQ for employers and an FAQ for employees. And so should you choose to go down that path as far as utilizing that program, it is a really great program. They're making it more and more accessible, removing some of the regulatory burden on that, because truly we've seen a balance in programs rolled out over the last week and a half in an attempt to maintain as many people on employer payroll as possible, as we've seen the UI be flooded with a record-setting number of unemployment claims, up over 3 million now in the country. So anything we can do to maintain a lift for the employers to be able to maintain staffing is what the attempt is. Simultaneously, the one thing that we consistently are hearing from SBA right now is that be very mindful of where you're at financially. And the biggest thing you need to be focused on is being a viable business coming out of this to then rehire staff. And so SBA has consistently over the last week and a half really pushed the emphasis on the point that if you need to make reductions, make them sooner versus later. Don't get yourself in such a big hole that it makes your business unviable in the long run. That's a balancing act, because there has been so much loosening of the requirements to qualify for unemployment. And then the additional aspects of having to search for jobs, having those programs removed and those burdens removed from the employee who's been laid off temporarily, not having to search for work, because we know that this climate, there are very few jobs out there. I'd also point everyone to our local WorkSource page. They have set up employment offers currently available, and they have a really good pulse on who in our community is hiring locally now. There are an abundance of jobs out there to be had. The uncomfortable conversation within that is that pointing employees who may be losing their jobs to those pages, and helping individuals understand that if you are a cook at a restaurant, we're not advocating that you're not going to be a cook moving forward, but you can get a job as a stocker at a big box store, as a grocery retailer or something. Those jobs are available now. You can be paid, you get paid full wages instead of a reduced unemployment wage. And so finding a way to navigate that conversation and point staff who we all love and we all trust. All of us have gone through this. We went from a record low unemployment to immediately a record high unemployment in a matter of about 2 weeks, and never has this been felt by the American economy. And so truly an unprecedented time. But ESD does continue to change their programming and update it. So Jean, I see you put a comment in there. Would you mind unmuting and just giving some feedback to those business owners on about your process of rolling through the shared work program?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Our company went through shared work during the recession. We've been in business over 30 years. We have 15 employees. We're a design communications company in Spokane. And so when the recession hit us before, it obviously was a little slower in arriving, but we put our staff on shared work, and it actually was a really great plan. We still ended up probably laying off a couple of people after about 6 months, just due to the fact that the projects weren't coming in as much. But so when this happened, we decided we were going to jump on it right away again, just to be prepared. Because what's nice about shared work is that it's there if you need it. So I applied for it, and I was actually pretty impressed. I uploaded the application, I got approval like within a week. And the shared work staff answered the phone, which I was really surprised about. But so as an employer, what you need to do is basically have an Excel file prepared with all the employees' names, rates, addresses. And the person at Employment Security made sure that I knew I had to convert our salaried employees to hourly. She said, otherwise they won't be approved. She said you can go into ADP, which is our platform that we use, and go ahead and just convert them in their files, basically same day. And because once they start checking that, it all has to align. So we got approval on it. She said I would be receiving an email as the owner, and I didn't get that. I got a letter in the mail on Monday night when we were packing our stuff up to leave to go work off site, in fact. So we were really thankful to have that, be able to share it with our team and tell them that this is a safety net in case we need it. So I did follow up with Employment Security and told them I didn't get the email, which has like an employer packet and things you can tell your employees, but a lot of that is online. The one thing I will note is, because they've recently hired so many people there, those that answer the phone don't always know what they're talking about. So I'm in a little bit of a quandary on how much people are getting paid. So I'm figuring that out. So what else was I going to say about that? The nice thing about that, and just for those that aren't familiar with it, if we have like designers that have 80 hours a week, I'll go by week, 40 hours, we have enough work for the designers to have 40 hours of work that we pay them for. We pay them that week for that. If we look and project 2 weeks from now, we're not looking like we're gonna have probably 20 hours per person. We can cut them down to half, basically. That's the obligation of the employer, is 50% of the hours for that week. So if your employees work 40 hours, you have to pay at least 20. You have to pay for medical insurance, 401k, basically any benefits that you already provide. So that's kind of the commitment to that. And it's week by week. The employee's responsibility is to go in on Sunday, basically Sunday through Thursday for the week prior, and put their hours in that they weren't paid for by Klunt-Hosmer. We haven't, just to be clear, we haven't started it yet. We'll see if we have to, but we have it set to go if we need to. And then like if the web department was busy one week, the designers weren't, we have flexibility there every single week. And that's what I really loved last time as an employer. And you have it's a year contract. Our benefits, we got hit with a really big increase a couple of years after that of like probably like $45,000 over a couple of years. But I would have to say it really helped us a lot. And I think we have to look at, do we do harder cuts faster or kind of drag it out? So we're just monitoring it right now and basically waiting in. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Jean.
Yeah.
And then an additional follow-up to the shared work program, Phil from Hub Sports Center asked if you're able to convert those employees back to salary upon bringing them back up to full hours. And yes, Phil, you can do that. It's the point at which you terminate putting them through the shared work program. You're able to reconvert them. One thing to be on the lookout for is that as with L&I's changes to the threshold levels for salaried and exempt employees, Washington State has a bar that's rising and will be the highest in the country over the next couple of years. And that puts many of our traditional roles who would have qualified as exempt employees to where you're going to actually have to convert these individuals to an hourly rate anyway, and treat them as a standard hourly employee and non-exempt anymore. And so that's one thing to look at as you start making those plans, is that potentially employees that are under that threshold, I believe that used to be at like 28,000 and it's moving its way up to what will be 80,000 in the long run here. Everybody below that mark as of 2026, I believe, will be an exempt or a non-exempt at that point. And so they'll have to be an hourly paid employee. So we're going to do, just so everyone's aware, as ESD continues to work through the kinks in all of their programs, we do have a call that we're slating for sometime mid next week, where GSI, West Plains Chamber, and us will be hosting a call with ESD staff to specifically run through details on each of their programs, because as Jean mentioned, ESD has hired over 150 new employees in the last week. They are inundated with claims, and many of your staff have received immediate rejection notices on unemployment claims. That is, in many cases, just a systems issue where they don't have the ability to process as well as they've had internal systems who have been set up in place for what is record low unemployment. And so as they scale those systems back up to handle the sheer volume, what they're recommending is if if you have employees who have been rejected for unemployment, that you encourage them to continue to reapply. Applying in the evening is also a big key. So the later into the night you apply, the less load there is on the system. That's also a trick to have staff be able to get around those issues. And then again, WorkSource here locally, as our local office, their staff, they've been doing the same thing in as far as staffing up goes. And so be sure to reach out to them. They are our local office for ESD here. So jumping back to our questions, I'm going to go back up to the top here. We had, I know Carrie briefly touched on Donald Morgan's question, just as an additional follow-up. So the unemployment rating, will our rating suffer from the crisis? And then it does look like UI and ESD are taking into account the current situation. All the rulemaking has not been completed on that, and so the impact is still a little up in the air, but everything from the federal down to the state level is pointing to some major concessions on those rules that do go into that. I don't think we'll see the full rollout of that until things calm down a little bit, but as these programs evolve and are adapted to really be in place for this crisis specifically, one of those elements that's being looked at is that everyone is being affected by this. And so to hit your rating with a rate increase due to the COVID is something they're trying to put into those rulemaking sessions as they're reevaluating them currently. And so it does look like there'll be some major concessions made. To what extent is still a little unknown, but it likely is not to be what a standard case of mass layoffs would hit you with as an employer. Carrie, you have anything else to add to that one?
No, I think you covered it beautifully. It's hopefully they'll be hopefully they'll mitigate based on what's going on, and we'll see how the government does on this.
Definitely. Michael Terrell from Landscape Architecture, what is a business's responsibility / liability for workers functioning from home? I'll let you give a stab at that one.
Yeah, so you need to be under the understanding that they're working in a safe environment. So it's very difficult for safety issues when people are working from home. You know, all your employment postings, the people need to have access to labor laws, employment postings, you know, the LNI information. So as you're implementing your telecommute policy, this is not something most people think of, but make sure people are aware of all the issues. In terms of your liability for their expenses, and Lance, correct me if I'm wrong, basically the rule of thumb is if people are making more than twice minimum wage, you can generally assume that they can pay for their own expenses. But if it's if they don't, or if it's a mandated, you're making them do this, then you have to pay for it. So in the case of a telecommute or a self-quarantine and an employee doesn't have a computer, you know, you might be able to make a case that you shouldn't have to provide one, but if you can, I probably just would, because, you know, again, everything's kind of up in the air, and the more you can do to facilitate it is probably the better. What do you think, Lance?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I would point to the call yesterday that GSI staff hosted with Witherspoon Kelley. They spent quite a bit of time on this. We will again be circulating that link to that video from the call there for you guys to be able to take advantage of and listening to. The one key that there is a distinction between exempt and non-exempt. So your hourly staff, there is a threshold there if they're paid on an hourly and you require them to work from home. Things like internet and computer, you do bear some burden there where technically you would be liable for compensation to the portion of their bill that they're utilizing time for company work. And so that is specific. There is rulemaking in place that if an employee is an hourly employee not exempt, there is a threshold there that employers are having to consider. Now, the one carve out there is you're allowing them to continue to clock hours when in most cases that person would need to be temporarily laid off. So there's a balancing act there. And again, I would encourage you to speak with your employment law consultant or legal advice there before you make your overall decision. I could imagine a company like Clint Hosmer would run into that very specifically when you have staff who you now have reduced, and so that's probably something that you've had to take into consideration. It's a balancing act, knowing who your employees are, but again, to Carrie's point, people do really weird things when they're challenged in really tough times. And so we can't make assumptions of who you have as team members in this moment. Really be mindful of how to keep your company whole. So when you come out of this, you can rehire, you can be just as strong as you were going into it. And so again, that's a really tricky question that we do advise you seek some counsel on if you are going to shift to a full telecommuting and you may be below the threshold. So your employees are hourly who are now telecommuting. They may request compensation for portion of their internet expense at home. Moving on, there was, let's see here, Chris Kramer from Christian Brothers Automotive in Liberty Lake. with shared work, if employees on a piecework rate, I assume they would have to be converted to hourly too. So project-based, piecework-based, they would need to be converted. And yes, that is anybody using shared work program has to be converted back over to an hourly rate to qualify as part of that program. And again, that is one program that ESD is really pushing right now because it's a way to take burden off the rest of the UI system. And so as any chance that we can maintain individuals on company payroll, they're really focused on that. So shared work from the beginning of this crisis has been a program of emphasis from ESD, and they've been really making sure that that department in general is fairly well staffed. They had shifted resources initially over to that department to handle the workload there as well. Okay. Sabrina had a question: is unemployment paying the full amount or a percentage of the salary? And it still remains a percentage. So in most cases, 60%. There are a few programs out there that I believe that are opened up to 85% is what we're hearing right now. Those are still being fully fleshed out as the federal agreement with the CARES Act and the phase 2 agreement had already been in place. And so we should learn the nature of this changing landscape. We know the bill details as the Senate's approved the CARES Act for the phase 3 agreement, and the House just passed it, the second tier package as well. So now it moves to President Trump for signing. We had posted yesterday in our email to our membership the U.S. Chamber full legislative digest of the bill. We'll have another one that'll come out over the weekend as we get finalization of all the details on that package. There were quite a few things that were still up in the air, specific to certain sectors of employment too, that may change things dramatically on that front. So, and then in addition, we're expecting the Department of Commerce for the state of Washington and their $200 million allocation of funds from the legislature. The rulemaking or the decision making on how that will be distributed and what programs and what grant programs will become available should come out later today. So again, a lot coming out at the end of the week here as well as over the weekend as the legislators both in Congress and on our state level and the state departments end up making their final remarks on what to expect here. So bear with us as more details come out on that. And then Jean did make the note there in the comments for everyone that it has been heard, and to reiterate what we said earlier, it doesn't look like ESD is going to make rate hikes during this year. There is no formal document that I can point you to that says that's the case yet. It's been in conversation. I'd imagine that will become formalized here as we get farther into the crisis. Right now, I think that's less of a top priority at the moment compared to getting the programs staffed up and out there so employees that are being let go can access funds there. And so with that, I want to be mindful of time. We are welcome to have questions emailed over to us. We can connect you directly with Carrie and Alex for anything there. We will again circulate the video recap of this. There'll be a link getting you to a YouTube page with that. We will put our question and answers into the comments of that video. And then again, if you have additional questions, feel free to send those to us. We can direct you, get you in touch with Carrie and Alex. And then we will also circulate the 4 documents that they've provided as templates for you to utilize as employers. And then again, follow up for next week. We are working on calls specifically with ESD's team. That'll be a much larger call that'll be circulated between us, GSI, and West Plains Chamber. So again, just stay tuned to your email. What I can tell you from the Chamber of Commerce perspective right now, we are all working very hard jointly to bring programs to you and do our best to not overlap. So we are pointing members of each group to the other organizations and trying to divide and conquer to establish programming that is meaningful and impactful and helps you navigate this very challenging time. Our staff at the Valley Chamber, we are 100% working remotely. We are still all on staff and have contact via email. So if you have questions, feel free to call the office. Those voicemails are forwarded to each of our staff individually. And we're working on your behalf still. Honestly, it's probably a busier time than I can ever remember. Which is great. Unfortunately, I wish the circumstances were different, but it is what it is, and we all are in this together. We have a really great community here in Spokane County. Our city of Spokane Valley, city of Liberty Lake, and city of Millwood specifically are working hard to ramp up some programs to help those industries that are impacted the most. And so as those programs come together, we will be communicating those out. As regional programs come online, we'll be also communicating those out. From an employment resources stance, we have come together to try and unify where information is hosted. And so in an effort to not duplicate work, we are all now directing employment resource questions to GSI's page we've built out with all the partners from the chamber perspective. We've built that resources page out. We're also working on standing up a standalone regional site that'll have additional resources. And so really, if you go to our site, we'll be directing over to that centralized page so that all the information possible as all of us attend different calls and pull these resources together for you as employees or centralized spot to help navigate the ever-changing systems that are in place. So at this time, I would like to thank Carrie and Alex again for your guys' help and assistance in coordinating this call. And again, everybody on the call, thank you for your time. Look for the link to be out in your email shortly. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Lance, and thank you everybody for attending. And again, don't hesitate if you have any questions. I think the most important thing for business owners now is to have a game plan that will really help you mitigate the impact of that. So whether you send a question to us or other organizations or the chamber, there are people here to help you, and don't hesitate to use that help.
Okay, have a good day. Thank you, everybody.